Now I proceed to give the floor to His Excellency Jim Young Kim, President of the World Bank. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Excellencies. I'm truly delighted to be among so many distinguished delegates and colleagues in a country of great beauty and historical significance. This week, we have the opportunity to build on Ethiopia's legacy by presenting the world with a shared vision for substantially increasing funding for the world's poor, moving from billions to trillions of dollars in development spending. As we know, this year is crucial for global development. The decisions that we make in 2015 will impact the lives of several billion people across the world. This conference marks the beginning of a trajectory that will take us to New York for the UN General Assembly in September, to Lima for the IMF World Bank Group annual meetings in October, and to Paris for the Conference of the Parties in December, as the world comes together for historic summits to agree on a new vision for the next 15 years of development. I'm honored to be here to represent the World Bank Group, as well as the African, Asian, Inter-American, and European Development and Investment Banks. The multilateral development bank community is in the business of supporting you on the ground to improve the lives of the most vulnerable. Many question whether it's possible to end extreme poverty in just 15 years, but I firmly believe that it's not only possible, but it's within our grasp if we commit to work together to make it happen. Our confidence is partly based on the great progress that's been made over the past 25 years. Roughly 1 billion people have lifted themselves out of extreme poverty. Our confidence also is based on a three-pronged strategy to fight poverty: grow, invest, and ensure. We must support the economic growth of countries, invest in people, especially in their health and education, and ensure that we can provide safety nets that prevent people from falling into poverty. We understand that reaching this goal of ending extreme poverty means that we can't continue with business as usual. We must be bold, we must be creative, form strong partnerships, and find new resources to meet our goals. The targets of the Sustainable Development Goals are ambitious. We've gathered here in Addis Ababa to bring together some of the world's brightest minds and most capable leaders to unlock resources and leverage the billions of dollars in official development assistance to create trillions in investment of all kinds, public and private, national and global. The more funding we leverage, the more strategically we invest each dollar, means the more children we will educate, more patients we will treat, and more vital services we will provide. During the 15-year effort to reach the Millennium Development Goals, multilateral development bank support grew from $50 billion to $127 billion a year in grants, concessional and non-concessional loans, risk-sharing instruments, guarantees, and equity investment. Going forward, the MDBs will continue to increase the level of financing available to support our partner country efforts to achieve the SDGs. During just the first 3 years of the SDG period, 2016 to 2018, the MDBs plan to provide financial support of well over $400 billion. Now, to end extreme poverty, we have to apply the knowledge that we've accumulated over many decades to tackle the greatest challenges of the 21st century. We must get children off to the right start. Our research shows that investing early in life yields high returns. The Every Woman, Every Child initiative helps governments end preventable maternal and child deaths through a funding mechanism that provides smarter and more sustainable financing for women's and children's health. We will launch this new financing facility at this meeting. We must tackle the problem of climate change, and we especially have to find ways of reducing greenhouse gases. This week, we're pioneering an auction facility to help reduce the emission of methane gases. And we must prepare for the next pandemic. Ebola has shown us that we are woefully unprepared to fight pandemics, and even the situation of MERS showed that even very developed countries can sometimes stumble in their response. We need to do 4 very specific things, and we need everyone in this room's support. First, we need to support WHO. WHO must become much, much stronger and lead us all in fighting these epidemics. Secondly, we must build functioning healthcare systems that can contain outbreaks in every country in the world. It will be the unprepared country that will accelerate the epidemic. Third, we must have prearranged agreements with all the private sector players who have been so generous during the previous response, MSF, drug companies. We must pre-negotiate that. And finally, the part that we're working on is we must need a ready source of hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that will be ready within days and not months, as occurred during the Ebola outbreak. The reason we need to focus on these major issues is because it has both human and financial impacts. The pandemic's just as one example. If a 1918-like flu pandemic happens again, and the likelihood of that is very high in the next 30 years, it will mean tens of millions of people who will die, and as much as 5% of global GDP. That's almost $5 trillion that we will lose. I'm very grateful to be here in Addis with so many people who are truly committed to finding financing solutions to our most pressing development issues. Let's use this year to secure the resources we need to give all people an equal opportunity in life, no matter their place of birth, their race, or their gender. I'm inspired by the astounding progress already made to reduce extreme poverty in the world, and I'm inspired too by the commitment and actions of so many of you here today. We must now push to expand the best ideas and programs from neighborhoods to countries to regions and then to the entire world. We will push for trillions of dollars to give billions of people an equal chance. We're part of a growing global movement that is the first generation in humankind that can end extreme poverty. We must do it, we can do it, and we will do it together. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of the World Bank for his statement representing development bank groups. And now I call upon His Excellency Roberto Azevedo, Director General of the World Trade Organization. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Prime Minister Hailemariam Desalegn, Mr. Secretary General, Heads of State and Government, Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is truly an honor to be here with you today as we look ahead to the post-2015 development agenda. And the principle of sustainable development is enshrined in the founding agreement of the World Trade Organization. Page 1, paragraph 1. And it is there for one simple reason, because trade has the power to be an important driver of development, especially when it's paired with the right financing and capacity building assistance. And as we are all aware, the Millennium Development Goal to cut extreme poverty by half was reached in 2010. Well before the 2015 deadline, and this was a truly historic event. Now, around 2/3 of this reduction in poverty came from economic growth in developing countries, which was driven in part by trade. And the figures tell the story. Developing countries' share of global trade has jumped from 28 to 42% over the last 2 decades. In this way, trade has proven its potential in delivering gains for development. Trade can help to bring in new investment, create jobs, provide access to technologies, but as I have said, financing and capacity building are vital in making sure that the poor can benefit from all this. Indeed, and this is why these elements are central to the work that we are doing here. Take the WTO's Aid for Trade initiative, for example. To date, more than $245 billion have been disbursed through this initiative to help developing and least developed countries to improve their trading ability. And through our partnership in the Enhanced Integrated Framework, we have put a particular focus on LDCs. And I was proud to launch the second phase of the EIF just a couple of weeks ago in Geneva. And I encourage partners to provide the necessary support to this initiative. There are many other ways in which the WTO supports financing for development. In 2013, our members agreed the historic Bali package, which contains some very important development outcomes, and these include a number of decisions for LDCs, steps on agriculture, including on public stock holding for food security, and the Trade Facilitation Agreement, which for the first time will provide real, practical support to help developing countries implement the provisions of the agreement and therefore to reap the many benefits that it offers. And this agreement is about streamlining border procedures to dramatically cut costs of trade, and these costs of trade fall most heavily on the poorest. At the same time, it will increase customs revenues and it will create jobs, perhaps as many as 18 million jobs just in developing countries. But of course we must do more, much more. The benefits of trade still do not reach some of the poorest and the most vulnerable. So simply providing more trade opportunities is not enough. A broader and more systemic approach is needed, and this is why financing for development and the whole post-2015 debate is so important. We have identified trade finance as a key issue here. Up to 80% of global trade is somehow supported by some form of financing or credit insurance. But developing countries, they're still suffering from the consequences of the 2008 crisis. The supply of credit has not yet returned to normal levels. Also, in many regions, the financial system itself is less than adequate. And so, we're seeing big financing gaps, particularly in Africa and Asia. The estimate for the value of unmet demand for trade finance in Africa is between $110 and $120 billion. And by bridging this gap, we would unlock the trading potential for many thousands of individuals and small businesses across the continent. Besides, the smaller the business, the bigger the gains. In Asia, the unmet demand for trade finance is estimated at over $1 trillion. As a result, all too often, opportunities for growth and development are missed. Businesses are deprived the fuel that they need to grow. So we must respond to this problem. At the WTO, we have been working with regional development banks to support the creation and expansion of trade finance facilitation programs. We're working together to close those gaps, and very soon we will be launching a new initiative with this goal in mind. I am extremely pleased to see trade finance on the agenda for action that is being discussed this week. I think that WTO's work on this issue will be a big part of our contribution to following up on the outcomes of this conference, and we are committed to doing so. But as well as making the existing trading system better for developing countries, we also need to change and improve the system. We're now on the run-up to the WTO's Ministerial Conference in Nairobi in December. It will be the first time that such a conference has ever been held in Africa. Our focus there will be on delivering for Africa, for developing and least developed countries. There are some big issues on the table. Members are working to negotiate new rules on agriculture, industrial goods and services, and a new global deal on these issues, along with a package of outcomes to support the LDCs, would be a major breakthrough in our efforts to ensure that trade supports development. Moreover, it would be the biggest contribution the WTO could make to the global efforts on sustainable development and to taking forward all of the issues that we are discussing here today. So you may all count on my utmost personal engagement and the WTO's full support to the work that we'll be developing here. Thank you.
I thank the Director General of the World Trade Organization for stressing the vitality on financing and capacity building in making sure that the poor can benefit. Thank you, Your Excellency. Distinguished delegates, in accordance with the General Assembly Resolution 69278 of 8 May 2015, Her Excellency Christine Lagarde, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, was invited to make a statement at the opening segment of this conference. However, I have been informed that due to the current turbulent financial situation in Europe, Madame Lagarde was requested by European heads of government to attend an emergency Euro leaders summit in Brussels. Therefore, Mr. Min Zhu, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, will deliver a statement on her behalf. With the consent of the conference, I now give the floor to Mr. Min Zhu, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Prime Ministers, the Secretary General, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As Mr. Chairman just explained, let me start with saying that our Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, is not able to join us here today because of the developments concerning Greece. But she asked me to convey her deep regrets and her confidence that this conference will be a defining moment for global development and the full commitment of the IMF to continue support developing and fragile countries. As we gather here today in Ethiopia, a dynamic countries in a rising continent, we share a once-in-a-generation opportunities. A decade and a half ago, the international community came together to launch the Millennium Development Goals. Its call to combat extreme poverty was reinforced in Montreal. As the IMF stood shoulder to shoulder with the UN and other partners to forge a consensus on financing for development. On the journey from Montreal to Addis Abeba, much of the world has been changed. Across many developing countries where there was once isolation and stagnation, today is now integration and growth. In low fragile countries, the real per capita GDP has increased by almost 70%. At the same time, however, and as we all recognize, the fragile countries have tragically fallen behind. Across the world, the scourge of inequality and injustice remains. Over a billion people still live in extreme poverty. As the Africa proverb goes, unity is strength, diversion is weakness. To move further ahead on the path of sustainable, inclusive growth, we must be united and guided by the three key principles: partnership, commitment, and flexibility. First, the partnership. All countries, developing, emerging, and advanced must work together and with civil societies, the private sectors, and international organizations. We know that developing countries are best placed to drive their own development. We know that sound macroeconomic policies are essential to help mobilize resources and use them efficiently and effectively. But we also know that the developing countries cannot do it alone. The international community has a responsibility to create an enabling environment for sustainable growth and development, working hand in hand with the developing countries themselves. Together, through partnerships, we are greater than the sum of our parts, which lead to my second principle, commitments. To be effective partner, we must all demonstrate the sustained commitments, not only for 2015, but for a generation. Speaking for the IMF, with our global memberships and the mandate to promote the growth and the stability, we are committed to help turn to the new agenda into action, as well as enhancing our core financings of policy advice and capacities buildings. The IMF will also strengthen our lending to developing countries in 3 key ways. First, we will expand our access to all our concessional finance facilities to a full 50% increase. 2, we will target the concessional financing even more on the poorest and the most vulnerable countries. 3, and we will maintain for the long term the zero interest rates for our rapid credit facility loans for fragile states and countries hit by natural disasters. In these ever concrete ways, the IMF is strengthening the global safety net of a low-income country, and IMF is strengthening ourselves its commitment. So we need partnership commitments, and our third principle is flexibility. What challenges await? Some, like demographics, technology, and the environment, are well known, but their further ramifications are not. We, all of us, need to be ready to adapt to new challenges as they arise. I can tell you that in the IMF, we're already moving to address those we see as some of the major forces affecting our futures: fighting excessive inequality, promoting women's empowerment, mitigating climate change, and of course, eliminating absolute poverty. Going forward, you will see those issues feature increasingly in the work of an increasingly flexible IMF. Let me conclude with one word: working together. It is only by working together that we can seize the once-in-a-generation opportunity in Addis Ababa today and go beyond. Thank you very much.
I thank the Deputy Managing Director for his statement on behalf of the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. Distinguished delegates, as you are aware, our host city, Addis Ababa, is the political capital of Africa. It also serves as the headquarters of the African Union. I would therefore at this stage like to invite, with the consent of the participating states, Her Excellency Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, to make a welcoming statement. With the consent of the conference, I now give the floor to Her Excellency Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia and Chair of the Third Global Conference on Financing for Development, Excellency Hailemariam Desalegn, Your Excellency Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Your Excellency President of the UN General Assembly, Your Excellency Minister Sam Kutesa, my brother there, Carlos, we all live here in Addis. The President of the World Bank, all WTO Director General, all UN agencies, heads of state and government who are here, excellencies, ministers, and leaders of delegations who are here, regional and international organizations, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the African Union, a warm welcome to Africa and to this friendly city, which is the capital of Africa, Addis Abeba. 10 years ago, after he already announced his retirement from active public life, Nelson Mandela came out of retirement making the following statement, I quote, "Massive poverty and obscene inequalities are such terrible scourges of our times in which the world boasts of breathtaking advances in science, technology, industry, and wealth accumulation, that they have to rank alongside slavery and apartheid as social ills. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings." I close that quote from Nelson Mandela. It is this realization that drove the global consensus on the Millennium Development Goals, and that brings us together around the post-2015 development agenda, sustainable development goals, and to this third global conference on financing and development. Indeed, we made progress since the turn of the millennium and since Mandela made that statement. Millions have been lifted out of poverty, and we are hard at work to ensure that all children have access to education, that no woman dies while giving birth to life, that the scourge of HIV, TB, and malaria no longer become a death sentence to millions, and that all have access to health care, to water, sanitation, and clean energy. At the same time, we are far from creating a world free of hunger, disease, and want, which is, after all, what sustainable development is about. As we therefore gather here today from all corners of the globe, we have to ensure that we remain focused on this universal human goal to create this better world for all. The African continent, at the turn of the millennium, was regarded as the development challenge of the 21st century. It too has come a long way. Changes are happening on our continent at all levels: demographics, politics, social, economic, and environmental protection. Africa sees this as a window of opportunity to set ourselves on a path towards transformation, away from underdevelopment, fragility, marginalization, and conflict. Excellencies, our Agenda 2063, a 50-year vision for the Africa we want, therefore prioritizes investment in people, in their health, skills and education, development of infrastructure, agriculture and agro-processing, and transforming African economies through industrialization. Amongst all these priorities listed, investments in Africa's young people, who constitute over 70% of our population, is key. That is why we move beyond the focus on primary education of the Millennium Development Goals to also ensure access to secondary, vocational education, and strengthening higher education. In short, to develop our infrastructure, natural resources, including the blue economy, to industrialize and modernize our agriculture and agro-processing, Africa needs a skills revolution, especially in the sciences, technology, engineering, and innovation. As author and businessman Luke Johnson puts it, I quote, "Whilst capital might be in short supply, human ingenuity, energy, and is an infinite resource. So it is for that reason that we must develop this infinite resource, which is human ingenuity and energy, men and women, girls and boys. The empowerment of women and girls for us is therefore not only an issue of rights and participation, but it is also a social, and it makes social and economic sense. Excellencies, the successful implementation of Agenda 2063, we believe, shall provide an enabling environment and the impetus for global post-2014 development agenda, as well as the sustainable development goals. Resource mobilization and finance are critical to the success of any development agenda. We have, over the last few years, paid greater attention to domestic resource mobilization, to looking at how to stem illicit flows from the continent, prudent management of public and tax revenues, as intra-Africa and foreign direct investments, in addition to effective use of development aid. I trust that advances we've made as humanity in science, technology, innovation, in science and wealth accumulation will indeed be used for the common good of humanity, to eliminate the scourge of poverty and gross inequalities. I know that there's been a lot of emphasis on elimination of extreme poverty, but I think we should be ambitious and look at elimination of poverty. Because every time I've tried to explain this thing of extreme poverty, people ask me, Chairperson, are you saying it's okay if we're poor as long as we're not extremely so? And I've not been able to answer that question. And I hope you can bear with us as Africans, that Africans are saying, please, let's work together to eliminate poverty. And I hope that we shall go down in history as a generation that took its responsibility seriously and took collective responsibility to humanity and put an end to poverty. And through this Addis Ababa Action Agenda, I hope we'll be able to go a long way in eliminating poverty. Because if we don't take this opportunity collectively, history will judge us as a generation of missed opportunity. And I don't think we want to be judged as such. And of course, the least developed countries, which the majority are in Africa, whilst they must improve their own tax collection, they must improve their own revenue, internal revenue collection, but they do need a lot of support internationally in order to be able to get out of that status of being least developed country. From the African perspective, we can just assure you that we are determined to implement Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, which in the end, we want to describe Africa not as what the Millennium Development Declaration described it, as a development challenge of the 21st century, but we want to take Africa to a prosperous, integrated, peaceful continent which is people-centered, and a continent that will play a dynamic role in the world. And you will not find us wanting in terms of implementation. Every cent and dollar that you put will be put to good use. I thank you.
I thank the chairperson of the African Union Commission for reminding us what African icon President Mandela has said. Thank you for your welcoming address. We have heard the last speaker for the opening statement of this conference. Now we proceed to the second item, adoption of the rules of procedure. Distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before proceeding to the consideration of the organizational items on the provisional agenda of the conference, delegates are informed that all official documents are also available on the conference website. The conference will now consider item 3 of the provisional agenda entitled Adoption of the Rules of Procedure. Delegations have before them a note by the Secretariat issued on document A conference.227 and 2 containing the provisional rules of procedure of the conference. May I take it that the conference agrees to adopt the provisional rules of procedure as contained in document A conference.227-2? I hear no objection, so it is so decided. So the conference has thus concluded its consideration of agenda item 3. Now the conference will consider item 4 of the provisional agenda entitled Adoption of the Agenda and Other Organizational Matters. Your Excellencies, I would like to draw your attention to document A conference 2271, which contains the provisional agenda for the conference. Again, may I take that the conference wishes to adopt the agenda as contained in document A conference.2271. Thank you, Your Excellencies. I hear no objection. It's so decided. Therefore, the conference has thus concluded its consideration of agenda item 4. Item 5 is election of officers other than the President. The conference will now proceed to consider item 5 of the agenda entitled Election of Officers Other than the President. Under Rule 6 of the Rules of Procedure, the conference shall now elect from among representatives of participating states on the basis of ensuring the representative charter of the Bureau, 25 vice presidents, one of whom shall be designated as Rapporteur General. In addition, the conference shall elect an ex officio vice president from the host country. For the 24 vice presidents, with regard to election of the vice presidents, I have been informed that there is general agreement among delegations to elect the following countries. I will call the names: Asia Pacific States, Bangladesh, Eastern European States, Croatia, Estonia, and Poland, Latin American and Caribbean states, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Guyana, and Nicaragua, Western Europe and other states, Denmark, Germany, Luxembourg, Norway, and Switzerland. The conference wishes to elect Bangladesh, Brazil, Colombia, Croatia, Cyprus, Denmark, Ecuador, Estonia, Germany, Guyana, Luxembourg, Nicaragua, Norway, Poland, and Switzerland as vice presidents by acclamation. Thank you so much. It's so decided. As far as the ex officio vice president is concerned, in accordance with Rule 6 of the Rules of Procedure, the conference shall also elect an ex officio vice president from the host country. May I therefore take it that the conference wishes to elect His Excellency Sufyan Ahmed, Minister of Finance and Economic Development of Ethiopia, as an ex officio vice president. It is so decided. Thank you very much. On behalf of the conference, I congratulate the vice presidents and their election. The election of the additional vice presidents will take place as soon as the candidatures have been communicated. I would also like to inform the conference that the designation of the Reporter General among the vice presidents of the conference will take place as soon as the nomination has been conveyed. When it comes to item 6, which is organization of work, including the establishment of the main committee, the conference will now consider item 6 of the agenda entitled Organization of Work, including the establishment of the main committee. In accordance with Rule 46 of the Rules of Procedure of the conference contained in document A conference.2272, the conference may establish a main committee. Distinguished delegates will recall that at the final meeting of its drafting session, as part of the preparatory process for the Third International Conference on Financing for Development, held in accordance with the Resolution 68279 of 30 June 2014, on 7 July 2015 at New York headquarters, it was agreed that negotiation would continue on pending issues in the draft outcome document. In the note from the President of the 69th session of the General Assembly, issued as document A Conference 2276, the text of the draft outcome document of the conference, as prepared on the basis of the drafting session, was transmitted to the conference for further consideration. May I therefore take it that the conference wishes to establish a main committee and to allocate it sub-item B of the agenda, item 8. I hear no objection, so it is so decided. The conference has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of agenda item 6. The conference will now resume its consideration of agenda item 5 to elect, in accordance with Rule 6 of the Rules of Procedure, the chair of the main committee. I understand that there is a general agreement to elect His Excellency Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, as chair of the main committee. May I take it that the conference wishes to elect His Excellency Dr. Tedros Adhanom, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, as chair of the main committee by acclamation. Thank you so much. It's so decided. On behalf of the conference, I congratulate His Excellency Dr. Tedros Adhanom on his election as chair of the committee. I now give the floor to the just elected chair of the main committee, Dr. Tedros Adhanom. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
Excellency Mr. Hailemariam Desalegn, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia and President of the Third International Conference on Financing for Development. Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations. Excellency Mr. Sam Kutesa, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Excellencies, distinguished guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen. I would first of all like to thank you all for electing me to chair the sessions of the main committee. It's indeed an honor for me to preside over the work of the committee, and I can assure you of my readiness to discharge the heavy responsibility that's bestowed upon me by the member states. As you all know, this committee will be deliberating on the outcome document that will be adopted by this conference. Much work has been done on the text, and many consultations were held in New York to finalize the outcome document. I am therefore confident that continuing with the same positive spirit, we will reach a successful conclusion in our work. I am also confident that I would get the utmost cooperation from all involved to bring the work to fruition. This is the opportunity we all must seize to make history and stand united in our common resolve to eradicate poverty and ensure the path toward sustainable development. The decision we take in this conference would change the lives of hundreds of millions of people for the better in the years to come. It's my sincere call to you all, therefore, that we send the right message to make an actual difference in people's lives, particularly those that suffer from pain of poverty and destitution. Once again, let me reiterate my thanks to you all, and I will soon convene the meeting of the main committee after having consultations and making few logistical arrangements. I thank you.
I thank the chair of the main committee for his call. The conference has now concluded this stage of its consideration of agenda item, and we now proceed to item 7A, appointment of members of the Credential Committee. I now invite the conference to consider sub-item A of agenda item 7, entitled Appointment of Members of the Credential Committee. Rule 4 of the Rules of Procedure provides that there shall be a Credentials Committee of 9 members appointed at the beginning of the conference, and that its composition shall be based on that of the Credentials Committee of the General Assembly of the United Nations at its 69th session. The countries that are members of the Credential Committee of the 69th session of the General Assembly are Bangladesh, Brazil, China, Denmark, Jamaica, Namibia, the Russian Federation, Senegal, and the United States of America. May I take it that the conference wishes to appoint Bangladesh, Brazil, China, Denmark, Jamaica, Namibia, the Russian Federation, Senegal, and the United States of America as members of the Credential Committee of the conference? I hear no objection, so it is so decided. Delegates are reminded that in accordance with the rules of procedure of the conference, credentials issued by the head of state or government or by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or in the case of the European Union, by the President of the Council, European Council, or the President of the European Commission, should be submitted to the Secretariat of the conference if they have not already been submitted. The conference has that concluded its consideration of sub-item A of Agenda 7. We proceed to item 9. I would like to remind distinguished delegates that in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 69278 of 8 May 2015, this conference will include 6 multi-stakeholder roundtables to be held in parallel with the plenary meetings. Also, in accordance with the same resolution, I should appoint 2 chairs to co-chair each roundtable for among the heads of state or government and ministers attending the conference in consultation with participating states. Roundtables 1, 3, and 5 will be on the theme Global Partnership and the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. And roundtable 2, 4, and 6 will be on the theme ensuring policy coherence and an enabling environment at all levels for sustainable development. Roundtable 1 will be held this afternoon at 3 p.m. in conference room 2. Distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the conference shall now commence its general debate on financing for development under sub-item A of agenda item 8. I would like to remind distinguished delegates that with a view to ensuring that all representatives participating in the conference have the opportunity to deliver statements in the general debate, statements should be as brief as possible. I kindly request heads of state and government and heads of delegation to consider this appeal.